they're coming into like vision now, and they'll come into various other forms with these multi-modal models. So for an individual business, that means then that to a large extent, intelligence is going to be something that you buy in, or the kind of artificial intelligence is going to be something you're largely buying in. You're not going to be developing a lot of your own or less of your own individual AI models. But then I guess the question becomes, well, what is it then that my business, I've got this massive kind of event coming in, the exponentially intelligent models coming in, and then what is it that my business can do? And I just have one very, very, very clear message to that, which is concentrate on your data. It's your data and your people. That's what you've got. So don't mess around with any kind of like Gen AI sideshows. I mean, okay, fair enough. There can be a few of those, but really the core of your data strategy, core of your AI strategy, in my opinion, is your data strategy. Yeah.
Hey, everybody, this is James Gray, and welcome to the Graymatter podcast, where we learn from top tech and business leaders how to leverage data and AI strategy to accelerate innovation. And today I'm really excited to welcome the knowledge graph guy. And if that resonates with you, you know exactly who I'm talking about, Mr. Tony Seale. But if you don't, let me give you a quick overview of Tony's background. For over a decade, Tony's been at the forefront of linking data, combining creativity with technical expertise. His pioneering work integrating large language models and knowledge graph within large organizations has garnered widespread attention, especially through his popular weekly LinkedIn posts. This ongoing contribution to the field has earned him the title, the Knowledge Graph Guy. Tony's journey into AI and knowledge graphs began as a personal project, secretly developed from under a computer at his desk at his time at an investment bank. What started as a passion soon transformed into deep expertise, enabling him to deliver mission-critical knowledge graphs into production for Tier 1 banks, helping them to unlock the full potential of their data. Today, as the founder of the Knowledge Graph Guys, Tony is dedicated to helping organizations harness the power of this data. His consultancy develops cutting-edge knowledge graphs that fuel innovation and growth in the rapidly evolving age of AI. Well, Tony, it's so good to see you.
It's really good to be here. Thank you so much, James, for having me on. I'm looking forward to this.
Oh, yeah, because I've got so many questions, Tony. And, you know, I first came across you. There were all these posts that were being kind of showing up in my feed at LinkedIn. And I love knowledge graphs, and I started reading your stuff. And of course, it's super deep. But what I'd like you also have this perspective, which is kind of strategy oriented. And that's really where I want to kind of take the conversation today, is really talking about, certainly about knowledge graphs, but where they fit into kind of the business strategy. Because I think there's some really important nuggets here that I want to kind of tease out for you to share with people in my audience. And so it's been a couple of years since I've built knowledge graphs, but let's make sure we ground everybody around what is a knowledge graph.
Yeah, so knowledge graphs are basically a way of representing data. So we're often used to seeing data in terms of like Excel spreadsheets, where we're going to stick everything into like this sort of square rectangular box. And maybe we might take that up to like a relational database, where then we're going to connect our rectangular boxes together. And a graph is a slightly different way of representing data, where as opposed to the square boxes, what we do is we take our data items and they become nodes, and then we connect them together with edges. So basically it becomes more about the kind of network structure. And it can be quite helpful to think about something like a social network. So all of the major technical platforms have knowledge graphs now. But if you took kind of something like Facebook as an example, or LinkedIn that you saw my posts on, the knowledge graphs behind those are like social networks. So you're kind of drawing out information that's based upon the relationships that exist between the people. But with a knowledge graph, it doesn't just have to be people that we're connecting together in this kind of rich networked way. We can connect any information within this structure. And actually, that's a great thing to do, because there's a sort of richness to the semantics that you can put in a structure like that. And as I say, so far, really, it's just been the major large technologists that have been using this technology, with some kind of going down to like some of the people in finance and in pharma. But with the advent of large language models, that's really opening the door to a lot more people using this, because suddenly these knowledge graphs are easier to create. And also this rich structure works really well with the large language models. And I don't know, maybe we'll get into that stuff.
Oh, we will. We will. We'll definitely get it. We definitely will. And there's a couple other terms that I want to make sure we kind of ground people on, because you're probably going to be using these words. Ontology.
Yeah, so yeah, ontology, that's a scary sounding word. And actually within our little community around knowledge graphs, we used to call it the O word because we didn't
Yeah,
we
word.
didn't dare mention it within a business setting because it would frighten everybody off. It's actually like comes from Aristotle, so dates all the way back to ancient Greece. And in the context of a knowledge graph, it's not actually so fancy. It's simply taking the kind of schema. So just like with a database, or let's go back to just Excel, where you'd have had the columns in your Excel spreadsheet with all the data in there, and that column heading. Then in the Excel, in the kind of rectangular world, those column headings, that's your kind of metadata. It's your information about the schema. And all really an ontology is kind of taking that metadata and then putting it into this same kind of graph form. But that actually turns out to be quite a powerful thing to do because actually, and this is why we call it an ontology, you can really begin to represent the concepts as they exist in the real world. You're not kind of like dumbing it down for like a technology platform. You're actually saying, what are the words that the business are using to talk about how this domain operates? What are those words? What are those concepts that are lying behind those words? And then
Right.
for each of those concepts, we're going to try and capture it in the ontology. And then just like we were kind of putting the edges between the nodes in the graph, we do the same. How do these concepts relate to each other? So within this domain, like I'm a railway, so I've got trains. And how do trains relate to tracks? Kind of obvious, but these in a given domain, these can become very nuanced. And actually, the ontology turns out to be really important because having this abstract representation of the semantics of the data, of the meaning of the data, captured within business language, then again, when we start coming to do the AI strategy, that kind of lets the AI connect in on that level. So, suddenly we can kind of formalize the concepts that are within this business.
Right. Right. And we're certainly going to get kind of deeper into, as you mentioned, kind of the AI strategy and where the role of the graph, the ontology, the semantic layer kind of fit in. And certainly AI has been garnering all the limelight the last 2 years and certainly will this year with the rage of agents and so forth. But maybe as a launching point, there was one of these quotes that I like you had. AI is like the iceberg, the algorithms on the surface, but you should begin by focusing on the data underneath.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, it's a very important point that because I think a lot of people at the moment, like a lot of businesses, certainly the ones that I'm working with and have worked for, everyone's aware that something big is on the horizon here. We all kind of know that this thing is going to be disruptive. People, I think, are probably still underestimating it. The vast majority of people are still underestimating exactly how disruptive this thing's going to be. I mean, to put it in context, from my perspective, it's at least as big as the industrial and agricultural revolutions. We have a big event on the horizon here. So for businesses, it's going to have widespread impact. Overhyped in the short term, but like in the long or medium term, even really, I think it's still underhyped actually. So given that, you're then left with a situation of what is it that my business needs to do in order to handle this massive event which is coming my way. And I think the last thing that you want to do, although sadly I think a lot of people are doing this, is to kind of run around in a panic saying, okay, well, what's our Gen AI strategy going to be?
Right.
Generate me, everybody across the business, come up with your ideas of what a Gen AI use case for this business is going to be, and then spawn off like a whole bunch of all of these kind of like Gen AI side projects. For me, that is missing the big picture because the big picture is, and that's where the AI iceberg comes in. All AI is dependent upon the data that you're training it on. So if we take what's happened with the foundational models, so these kind of like these big models from the hyperscalers, they've basically taken all of the information that was on the web, so this huge repository of data that was on the web, and then they've trained their large language models upon that huge data set. And now they've pulled in various other data sets as well that are private data sets. So like an utterly vast data set of publicly available or let's say generalized kind of information. So a lot of what those hyperscalers are actually doing is around curating those data sets, obtaining those data sets, making sure that they're in the format in order to be able to process through these models. So all of that's kind of going on behind the scenes, and we don't get to see that. We just get to see the kind of glittering tip of the iceberg, which is this amazing, incredible model. And in terms of an individual business, then what I would predict is increasingly going to happen, because these models are very good and they're going to continue to get better and better. They're going to sort of eat a lot of the rest of AI. So it used to be that, we had like various different disciplines around natural language processing, and the foundational models have kind of eaten most of that, because they're like this kind of pocket knife that can do. They're coming into like vision now, and they'll come into various other forms with these multi-modal models. So for an individual business, that means then that to a large extent, intelligence is going to be something that you buy in, or the kind of artificial intelligence is going to be something that you're largely buying in. You're not going to be developing a lot of your own, or less of your own individual AI models. But then I guess the question becomes, well, what is it then that my business, I've got this massive kind of event coming in, the exponentially intelligent models coming in, and then what is it that my business can do? And I just have one very, very, very clear message to that, which is concentrate on your data. It's your data and your people. That's what you've got. So don't mess around with any kind of like Gen AI sideshows. I mean, okay, fair enough. There can be a few of those, but really the core of your data strategy, core of your AI strategy, in my opinion, is your data strategy.
Yeah, and I'd like to kind of double click on that, which is why I started with that kind of point, because a lot of times, like you said, it is these frontier models, it's all these kind of tools, but rarely, unless you're a data person like us, the reality is that behind this, right, and the need for your company to really harness and organize the data for kind of AI. And you talk a little bit about, I'd like to maybe continue this around the kind of this relationship between large language models and knowledge graphs. And I'll just kind of read a couple things that I found really interesting. You said, as we move into the next phase of AI adoption, where organizations must feed their own data into large language models to realize their benefits, it's crucial to model the relationships explicitly. Large language models thrive on these relationships. That's where the power lies. So tell me a little bit more about that. If I'm inside an organization, how should I kind of be leveraging kind of this nugget of wisdom?
Yeah, well, to a certain extent, again, it kind of just relates back to a fundamental truth that data is all about relationships. So actually, no piece of information exists in isolation. It's always existing within the context. And anybody within the data domain knows that. And actually, I think any business person anybody that spends any time kind of thinking about it, you can realize that, well, to see what this situation is, I need to connect this to all of the other dots to get that information and get the context about the situation that's happening. And large language models as well, they work very well on that kind of context. So what we do is we can inject into their context window, we call it the context window of the large language model, this rich structure of information, like the relationships that exist within the context of this business. And because you're putting this kind of like network of information in there, large language models are pretty good at being able to kind of traverse that network of information to kind of join the dots and say, I see what's going on here within this context. And it's the richness of those relationships which then give you the kind of like level up answers that you're able to. And those are the business insights that are going to matter. The kind of, if you're capturing kind of nuanced relationships with rich semantics describing how these things connect together, it's almost like you create a path through the graph that you could read out. Because if you created your ontology correctly, then the concepts themselves are captured within business semantics. So it's basically, as I kind of walk from one edge to another across this graph and create a path through the graph, it's almost like it reads out like a sentence if you've done it well.
Sure.
Because the edges have all got nice names to them and the data items have got nice names to them. And then you can just kind of feed that into the large language model, which can read them.
And I totally understand that. And then you said a knowledge graph can be used to train proprietary AI models that feed off data that is refracted through the lens of your organization's semantics layer. So I'm assuming that that's kind of what you're talking about, the fact that you've defined this and you're providing that rich context to the language model.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually, so if you're training the model, because there's this thing that we can do where we can take a foundational model and then we can fine tune it to a particular organization. So that's kind of like one option. And in which case you're using your knowledge graph to kind of as training data to fine tune the large language model for your particular context. Or actually there's this other incredible thing that the large language models can do, which is that, as I say, you can just inject information into their, what we call their context window, and then they're able to kind of reason over that in inverted commas. That's reason's a bit of a loaded term within the community, but they're able to kind of understand that context, and then they're able to give an answer based upon that specific context. So you've kind of got those two routes, and the graph can work really well for both of them.
Right. And then, I know you kind of, a lot of people who are thinking about, they're thinking about certainly around their large language models, but really what I hear you saying is that focus on your data, focus on getting an ontology in a place, and then focus kind of this understanding of your data so that really that the large language models can leverage it. And you said that these large language models thrive on the relationships. That's where the power lies.
Yeah. And I think also it's like we have this short window. So the models are getting more powerful. I mean, it all could come to like some crashing halt at some point. But my guess, and people who obviously intimately involved with it, like Microsoft and Facebook, and the people kind of training these models, they're chucking enormous, vast amounts of sums of money. You know, the amount of money that's going into this is almost insane. So
crazy.
a lot of very bright, very intelligent, well-connected leaders in technology believe that this thing's going to keep going, and I agree with them. I think it probably will as well. If that's the case, then actually organizations don't have that long to get themselves in order for this, because if you're caught kind of napping and you haven't done this thing of like sorting your data out, then at the point where the full-on AI kind of hits in, your business is probably going to be in a real lot of trouble. So there's kind of a trick, which is to use this intermediary phase where we have very good models, but not yet super good models. They're good, but they're not like AGI, whatever you mean by, whatever it's kind of meant by that. But they're not able to do anything that people within your business can do at the moment.
Right.
So we kind of have this window. And my very, very strong recommendation is that you perform the trick of taking the models as they exist, taking the intelligence that model has got, and turn that back on the problem of kind of integrating and connecting your data. So you basically use the large language model to help you with the onerous task of working out what your ontology is, and then kind of like, well, how do I connect all of my data back into that ontological structure, and how do I do the entity resolution so that all of my data connects together? All of these things, they're very hard, and that's kind of why knowledge graphs have remained kind of niche up until this point. Only that the sort of biggest technologists have been able to kind of engage with this stuff, or like the large investment banks or pharmaceuticals that have kind of willing to kind of throw the resource at it. It's incredibly resource intensive, but there's an opportunity now to kind of use the models to help with the process of organizing the data.
The ontology.
Yeah.
Okay.
The ontology.
Sure
I
want to make sure I understand. So you're saying is leveraging the large language models kind of as a tool in the toolbox, as an enabler to help you build and refine. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's the trick. Trick. Yeah. So you can basically kind of take one of these, you can take a large language model and you can point it at a bunch of your documents, and you can say, well, what ontology would you create out of, what concepts are you seeing here? Or you would point it at the schema of your database and say, okay, now like extract me out the ontology from this. And it's like that you're basically getting to look into the mind of the, again, I'm using these anthropomorphisms, but you look into the mind of the AI and pull out its understanding of what this thing is. And of course it's going to get that wrong, which is actually a great thing for businesses. That's a great thing, that it can't just look at it and understand exactly how your business is operating. But once you've kind of extracted that information out into this structured format, then you can get your experts to sort of have a look at it, and they'll be able to say, no, that concept doesn't relate to that one like that. It's actually got this kind of other relationship to it, and there's much more nuance in this than the thing seeing at the moment. So you can kind of you develop like this kind of like looping structure
Feedback.
where you, feedback loop. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I like that. Because a number of years ago, I built mine by hand, right?
Yeah. It's
And I
hard
think what
work.
you're saying, right? It is hard work.
Yeah.
Especially if you're not in a complex business. But to your point, like, hey, even if it's 70 or 80% correct, where it finds out all of these kind of entities and gives you some ideas, that's certainly better than
Yeah.
starting with a blank sheet of paper.
Yeah.
And so that's a great suggestion of using the LLMs to kind of help generate that. And you said a little while ago, like there's this window, and I want to kind of dig into that a little bit. And this term, because this is where I think it's a strategy thing. It's yeah, certainly there's technology involved, but you've got this concept. And if I'm not correct, you can refine, you can kind of correct me. But I hear you saying is that, hey, there's this window of opportunity. And if you've got this window of opportunity, here's some of the things you should be doing now. You should be building your ontology, or you should be getting that in place. You can use LLMs to kind of refine that. But you've got this other term, the ontological core.
Mm, mm,
And I'd
mm.
love to dig into this one because I'm really curious about it, where you say, as the AI revolution rapidly evolves, organizations need to strengthen their core. And this involves gaining a deep ontological understanding of what your business is all about. And you go on to talking about how LLMs are really kind of good at compressing the data. And you say the key takeaway is that the effectiveness of compression relies on these kind of connective structures. The better the connective structures, the better compression. And then you go on to say, which is really, I think, the strategy question, which is this critical imperative. It's imperative for organizations to realize they must undergo a similar process internally to survive in the rapidly approaching new world. So tell me more about this kind of survival and where you kind of see this. I really, when I read this, it's kind of like, hey, there's a real call to action here.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to unpack in that. So I think, I guess we've already set the scene that, in my opinion, a very major event is on the horizon. We're kind of at the beginning of this major event, which is going to be the arrival of really, really powerful AI. Anybody who spends any time thinking about it and reading up on it will be able to see that there's something big going on that's going to, okay, there's kind of a lot of near-term hype, but take the 5-year, 10-year time frame, and does anybody out there really think that this thing is not going to arrive in some form? I've actually revised my estimates down recently, if anything. So if we accept that is the if we accept that is true, and then we'd kind of take this idea that actually a lot of organizations are sitting on a gold mine of information at the moment. So like they've got all of this data that they've been connecting, and sometimes like for hundreds of years and stuff.
Right.
They've got the people, the kind of experts in that they've managed to attract towards them that really understand what this niche is in which their business is operating. You've got this period now where what you have to do is you have to kind of consolidate that all together. And that's where this idea of the ontological core comes in. The thing is that it's kind of like not like a kind of woolly branding version of what sits at the core of this business. So it could be, I don't want to do any degradation to branding and having the core values of an organization, et cetera, and the marketing that goes around that. Those are very important activities for the culture of an organization. But now, because we're talking about like machine learning and AI, what we need to do is get much more specific. So we need to get kind of formal about what some of these concepts are. And they're not just kind of the value concepts, but there's some of the operational concepts about the business as well. Stuff which has just been kind of in tribal knowledge, which is in people's heads, which is buried and scattered across multiple different databases in all of these kind of different places, is in Excel spreadsheets and is in documents that are kind of talking about this thing. All of this kind of like essence of the business. If you're truly going to be able to operate in an AI native way, you need to bring all of that together, which means that you need to formalize what these concepts are. And one of the cool things about ontologies is they have this notion of being able to model inheritance in it, so that we can kind of have more abstract concepts and then more specific concepts that kind of go down. Like, you could, I'm going to start modeling animals. So I'm going to have like mammals and reptiles. And then under mammals, I'm going to have cats and canines. Right. So I can kind of create these structures, which, although you can do in relational databases and structure and other formats like that, it's very, very difficult to do. Whereas with kind of an ontology, it's all built in very natively. And you can even have like inheritance structures going on the properties themselves. So we can have these very rich, complicated, powerful ways of modeling the world. Hence, we give it the name ontology. So by using these tools and getting the business people involved in it, because this is from a strategy perspective, this is key, and it's quite awkward and difficult actually to do this, where you're kind of getting the technologists and you're getting the business people, and you've got to bring them into the same room together, and you've got to say, we've got to work together here because we've got the technologists to know where the data is residing within these kind of various different systems and all of the kind of nuances and quirks that inevitably come around of storing the information. But it's the business people which kind of know, they've got the business understanding. Exactly what everything means. And there's this hard job to kind of like formalize that into this formal model. And that kind of brings up something else which is kind of complex, but probably is worth going into, which is that the large language models, they're existing within this kind of like fuzzy continuous space. So the way that they work by their kind of like training data and just their fundamental nature of how that they're trained through backpropagation means that nothing is like kind of discrete. Everything, it's like a kind of river where everything one concept flows into the next concept. Everything's kind of like probabilistic, which is where the kind of hallucination problems come and all of those sort of things, because nothing's ever completely 100% definite. You can't really compute over it in the way that you would with like a computer program where you would write a piece of code.
Right.
Whereas a graph structure is this very discrete structure. So, when we kind of take it down to the level of mathematics, that you will often represent a discrete mathematical problem in a graph structure. It's the fundamental structure really that we've discovered so far for doing like discrete mathematics. So like there, everything's getting a kind of box around it. Like we're putting a box around the concepts. We're putting like specific data items. We're making specific links between them.
Very precise. Right.
Yeah, it's very precise. It's rich and complex, but discrete and very precise. So you can now like start to pair these two things together with each other. And so you're taking these kind of like fuzzy concepts of understanding that exist in what we call the latent space, the large language model. So that kind of black box of the large language model. And then you're sucking it out and you're working with the domain experts to kind of get this kind of like formal representation of what this business really looks like. And then in complicated businesses with this kind of inheritance structure around the periphery of it, you're going to have the kind of diversity that's going on. And you want that because you want people to come up with new ideas and innovate and all of those sort of things. But at the same time, you want this kind of pressure to be cohesive. So basically all the different business units are maybe kind of doing their own thing. But it's like if all of them are talking about clients, then for goodness sake, don't invent again another definition of client when we've kind of got the core definition of what client is going on here. Just inherit from that and then add whatever it is that you need, and maybe what you need other people need as well in case. So then we want to kind of like push that in. So what that hopefully starts to do is like with the centralizing pressure of developing this ontological core, which hopefully at the end would actually kind of at the end of this process will actually kind of represent the essence of what this business is about, but in a very formal, structured way. And that's really important because now suddenly you've got the kind of general large language models, which are completely awesome, but to a certain extent, there's a slight sort of beigification about it. It's like, they're very general, so they're kind of taking the average of everything, and then as opposed to that, now for an individual business, it's distilled out the essence of what it is into a formal model. This business is about. Sorry, I went on a bit there, but it's
no. I think that's really. I think that's really important of why this kind of ontological core is so important, right? And I think when you're saying kind of get it all together, like the data, I think you're really talking about, if I understand correctly, really the definitions of this ontology, not necessarily the actual physical data.
You need to do that as well, I'm afraid. Yeah, I mean, there's no sugar coating this pill. It's all organizations, they don't realize it yet, but they have a big task because the ontology on its own basically only so much use. So if you've defined your core definition of what client is, and you happen to be storing information about your clients in 200 different systems,
Right.
who'd do that? No one would do that, would they? But
Right.
basically every large organization
Yeah.
that I've ever worked with sadly does. Then I'm afraid to do the ontological core properly, then you have to then do the individual systems have to do the mapping of the data back then to the client, so that you can begin to ask these kind of like far-reaching questions, like, what is this client in our business? How is our client related to this aspect of our business? That kind of customer 360 that's been the kind of dream for so long.
Yes. And you said, a little bit about this point here, and I'll just kind of read it. Getting back kind of to the urgency, you keep on saying, hey, there's a little bit of a window here. Like, we don't know exactly how long that window is, but you said organizational data is in disarray. If you wait around for a generalist AI to come and clean it up, you've kind of waited too long. But I think this last point, which again, it was strategy, you say external AIs with solid cores will easily penetrate your weak organizational boundary. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, this is a bit of a kind of like next level up again. But if you imagine a kind of a future that we're going to be existing in, where your competitor is begun this process. So the competitor has AI themselves up, and they can spin off 1,000 different agents with a good understanding of the semantics of how the business operates and access to like a large amount of data. I could, if I was your competitor, I could spin off like 1,000 different agents that would go contact various different aspects of your business at various different points. Like some piece of information I want to understand about how it is that you are intending to operate within this market. And I'm going to kind of get use my ontology and my smart AI to kind of like work out, well, what are the pointers that I would have to put together into this kind of network of information to know what it is that your strategy is, and that this is a strategy that you want to keep really private from me. You don't want me knowing this.
Right.
I spin up these agents, and they go off and they make various different requests into different parts of your business and your system, to all of the kind of separate parts of your business, and all the different people with their siloed data ploddingly reply to these different questions that as far as they're concerned, are completely unrelated. And then I piece that back together, and I've just seen straight through you.
Okay. So what I hear you saying is that there's kind of a way, or what you're thinking here, what you're saying is that there's a way for us to leverage an ontology from a very strategic perspective as well.
Yeah, because like if you'd have done your ontological core and you had connected all of your information together, and you too had like very sophisticated, because people are going to start bringing these AI agents. It's going to be non-optional to have some kind of AI agent out there interoperating and fielding certain calls, and people will be bringing them into various kind of different scenarios of their business. Instead, you had developed your own ontological core, you connected all of your own information together, and then suddenly all of these different questions are coming in from what are apparently different sources. You would be like, you now have the holistic understanding of what everything's going on as well. So you're able to see this kind of like network of questions going in, and you're like, no, Tony, I know your game. I'm not giving you that information. In fact, I'm probably going to give you like a bum steer to send you off into a different direction.
Okay. Well, I really like this. I think this is like very, very strategic, which kind of raises the stakes, right? That what I hear you saying, like if you don't have this in place, you're probably going to be exploited, right?
Yeah,
probably not. Yeah, that's really what you're saying? Correct?
I think that's it. Yeah, like projecting forward like 5 years, where suddenly like people are there's a lot more AI going on. The speed of which the interactions are occurring are much faster. It's difficult to have humans involved in every part of the process, and actually the humans are kind of slow, and they're still siloed, and they're not talking to each other, and don't really have the holistic understanding. Just the speed with which business will be operating. I think.
Sure. Well, yeah, and the fact that you've codified what these terms mean, the relationships. Right, machines can read that and can process that. Can as you said, just being able to evaluate what's going on in real time, almost real time. There's just no way a human, these disconnected systems, would ever be able to do that. Right, they wouldn't be able to reason all over those kind of disparate systems. Right, you probably wake up and after the fact of like, oh, I guess we were gamed or exploited in some strategic kind of position.
Yeah, or even if it's not like that kind of like seeing through to what your strategy is, maybe it's just that you're outcompeted. Do you know what I mean? Like the other people have kind of done this process and they're just like now offering the services that you're offering, so much cheaper and so much faster and so much better than you were able to do it. And then you're kind of like
Yeah,
struggling to catch up. But you know you've waited too late, so you haven't connected all of your data together, and you haven't, like, the process of actually taking your experts and getting them to kind of think about how all of these stuff like fits together in an optimal way, and capturing the formal semantics of
right.
it. You can't really rush that. And if you kind of wait, the point about waiting is if you wait to the point where you could just bring an AI in and plonk it onto your business and go, okay, work out what this business is doing, then basically that means, well, the value of your business is just,
Yeah, like it
it's
already.
already worth almost nothing, if because
Yeah,
that intelligence can be brought in by anybody. So that means that the AI can now understand everything that you're about, and you've already kind of leaked away any information that you were holding that was actually going to let you kind of operate within this sphere. Whereas if you've basically discovered your ontological core, then I have this theory that it's almost like, this is just a theory. I
let's
don't
hear
know
it.
whether, yeah, well, if you discover the ontological core, it'll actually kind of project out holographically almost onto the boundary of your organization. So you'll be able to have these kind of AI agents which are sitting doing the interaction at the boundary of the organization,
Mm,
but they're kind of connected in to this kind of like connected
cool.
graph of data, so that it's kind of basically controlling what is going around and has a holistic understanding of what is going around, a bit like kind of, like a cell in your body has got a boundary around it, or
Okay.
you've got a boundary around you with your kind of
Mm,
your skin, but also the way that you the thoughts that are going on within your head, you're keeping private. There's a kind of boundary there,
right.
and I think that there's a certain extent that without having a solid core, which is like a nucleus of the cell, or for us, it's our
Got it.
kind of sense of identity of our person, then without having that, you're not a distinct unit. You're kind of just nefarious, and then you don't persist. And if we're imagining this kind of, which is very hard for us to do, but like projecting forward
Mm,
into this kind of AI driven world, then organizations are going to need to preserve that identity, and they preserve that by basically consolidating their data and connecting all of their information
yes.
together.
No, I love that, and that, I guess that makes sense now. Now that you've described it, kind of this concept of the core, and I know you've got that one picture that I've seen in your writings with the core, and I know you have this kind of quote. You talked about the organizational identity. You can fine tune a private model that reflects your organization's identity. This is your solid core,
Mm,
right? And it will
mm,
increasingly become to define you. So,
mm.
like, if I'm a CEO, right, and I think what you're saying is like, hey, you need to do this, in that this representation is really kind of the embodiment, right, of what is your organization about, right? How does it function? What are the core concepts? How is it really connected, right?
Yeah, that's right. And you could say, well, I'm going to do that in a different technology. I'm going to just basically stick everything into Snowflake. And for certain organizations, that might even work. But I guess what I would say is that just at this very fundamental level, if you're kind of like looking for what the ultimate structure is for capturing discrete, precise information, so it's kind of like looking, currently the ultimate structure for doing the kind of like fuzzy continuous side is looking like the neural network. It's dominating everything. So if that's the ultimate
Yeah.
structure over that side, then the kind of ultimate mathematical representation over the other side then is a graph-based structure, because that's the kind of most flexible, powerful structure that we've got, that remains discrete so that you can be precise about it. So that's where that's kind of like where that then message of the knowledge graphs come in. And then the ontologies, it's kind of the same, because basically you've just applied that same kind of graph thinking, but now to the conceptual side of it. So you can now create these very complicated conceptual models that they're not just schemas. It's like more than a schema.
Right.
It's got a lot of really complicated, nuanced things that can be expressed in it. So this is the argument then of why that
Yeah.
actually knowledge graph is the best technology in order to be able to kind of go about implementing this. And I think that there's a growing acceptance of that. You can just see the way that knowledge graphs are hyping up, and everybody's talking about knowledge graphs now. I think
Yes.
it's because that kind of,
Yeah.
the penny is dropping for more and more people that this is the case.
Yeah, no, I remember back, I don't know, 2016, 2017, they were a big thing, right? Like knowledge graphs, right? And they kind of not died down, but certainly what I've seen in the last couple of years is like this reemergence, which is awesome. right? Because when I built knowledge graph, I was like, oh, I just love this. It's so precise. It makes so much sense. You get to connect your data. You can get to be really clear about it. And so this emergence of maybe you can say a little bit more about it, where knowledge graphs really fit into kind of this AI architecture with GraphRag. And maybe you can say a little bit more about it, of AI strategies kind of adopting, or if I didn't have a graph, right, what are some of the kind of limitations, let's say, for my AI strategy, if I haven't, right, kind of done this work around defining my ontology and getting a graph in place? Like, what are my limitations if I don't do that?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think there's a few aspects to this. So probably we need to get one thing out of the way, which is this kind of idea of total data connectivity. So far, we've kind of existed in a world where we could have these different siloed applications that were servicing given business lines. And then maybe we'd have like a data warehouse, or in a large organization, multiple data warehouses probably, in order to kind of like do a bit of reporting. And that's basically kind of connecting together, I don't know, maybe like 0.5% of the total data estate is kind of connected together.
Right.
And this theory is that that's just not going to be sufficient. It's not going to be sufficient to consolidate your data. You're going to have much richer connectivity, and you're going to have, much more of your data is going to have to be connected, and it's going to have to be much better organized around the semantics that is important to your business. So that's kind of like, I guess that's the first thing in there. And then it's like, well, with a large organization, how on earth do you begin doing such a tremendous task like that? Because we've been trying centralized versions of this for donkey's years. We've had data warehouses, and then we had like data lakes, and then data lake houses, and various other kind of watery metaphors. Pick your favorite one. But they're all kind of like based on the same idea that I need to take the data and I need to shift it into a central repository of some description. And data warehouses weren't working because designing the schemas was just too painful.
Yeah,
so then we tried it just took too long. And it was like the bottleneck. You have to go to the central data team in order to get any change made. And then basically we all just said, no, we're not doing that. And then it was like, well, okay, we'll just have it in a big data lake. But then, all right, you get the data, you chuck it in there, but you haven't actually kind of done the hard part of the task, because, you haven't done anything about like the semantics of what the data means. You haven't done the kind of entity resolution to connect the data together. So big deal. You've kind of put it everywhere central, but you haven't actually tackled the hard part of the problem. And I think now what we come to is this kind of like idea of decentralization, which you're getting then with the idea of data products and the data mesh and stuff like that. Yeah. And that's good. That's one of the keys, that basically actually we can leave the data where it is. We don't need to shift it into like one central location. Or you could shift it into one central location, but the key point is that we're going to distribute the kind of integration part. And that's where kind of classic data mesh then starts to fall down. I mean, it's evolving, but it hasn't really got a very strong story about how do you actually kind of make sure that the definition of a client is shared. The classic data mesh is the strategy of data products is, well, it just kind of isn't, and I'm going to do some mapping over the boundaries and stuff like that. And I think that's, I mean, maybe it's an improvement on what we're doing if you can get it off, but like the people that I speak to that are sort of trying to implement data meshes is already kind of saying, it's falling to pieces as we're trying to kind of put this into production. And that's even before you get to this problem of like entity linking. So if I've got a reference to a given client within my organization, if it's that same client, then everything should be pointing towards that same point. It shouldn't be like multiple different versions of that dotted around all over the place. And if a connection exists between two things, that connection should be forged once, and then it should be available for everybody else to use, because as we've talked about, connections are the essence of what makes data meaningful, because they give it its context. So if you kind of bring all of those things together, then the idea is that, well, actually what I can do is I can create these like semantic data products. I'm basically going to have this ontology, which like a smaller central team is attempting to manage, and is trying to put this cohesive pressure upon the organization to come together, is maybe like running kind of like workshops and working groups to try to get people to collaborate and define what their definitions are. But out around the periphery is maybe a bit bit kind of looser. But the point is that you're now, if I'm an application owner within your organization, and if you're the chief executive, and just like you would have maybe given me the diktat before, sorry, Tony, I know that you can't be bothered to do security, but you've got to put security over your application. I'm like, I'm too busy. I've got like this work stack. And you're like, no, I'm the chief executive. You've got to put every application within my organization has to have security, and there's a red flag if you don't secure your application. Well, in a similar way, you could say to me, sorry, Tony, I know that you're busy, but you have to stand up your data product, and I would like you to put effort in to try to connect to it, to try to map into any concepts that we've already got within our kind of core ontology. You can't just make up your own thing. I'm like, I don't want to do that. It's too much work. And you're like, well, sorry, the life of our business depends upon this, and you've just got to do it. And then you say to me, I'm sorry, where you've kind of got all these connections where your application links to other people's applications, I want you to use unique URLs. Publish your own data so that each data item gets a unique URL, just like each web page on the web gets a unique URL. But more than that, where your application links into other people's applications, I need you to use the unique URLs of those applications. And then using that kind of proven battle-hardened stack, which has created the web, and from the web we then created the large language model. So this is a way of connecting information which has been proved to work at scale. So if it can work at the web scale, it can work at the scale of even very large enterprise. So with any chief executive that is able to kind of motivate that, is able to begin a process which we can now make a lot less painful by using large language models to help us with, is able to initiate a process which is capable. Now, there's no like, no one's ever been able to give me a good logical argument why technically this would not work for like linking a whole organization together.
Okay.
There's a lot of reasons why it won't work for political reasons, and people want to. But technically, it will work. Okay. So it requires this kind of willpower to do it, and the failure to recognize that, because the process is going to take some time. The failure to recognize that within the next couple of years, I think, is just my honest view is the cost of that is going to be so high.
It's going to be painful. And so there was a lot there, and I guess kind of playing it back.
Sorry, I've gone on again.
No, this is really great, because I think this is a really good point of like, how do you actually operationalize, right, this strategy, right? We can't boil the ocean. We can't do centralized, right? Right, that doesn't work. But really, what I hear you saying is that once we get our ontological core, right, we can kind of federate that understanding to different teams who are in the organization, so they can adopt, right, those concepts, those relationships. And as long as they build their applications and their data products with that ontology, right, it's going to enable interoperability, right? Then it's just a matter of time where those kind of data sets and other applications can be connected, because they're using this kind of common ontology. And I also like what you just said, which is kind of the akin to kind of the security. Like, no, this is like, we have to do this. Like, you don't get a choice, right? You don't get the choice to make up your own words around what these things kind of mean, right? And so it's that balance kind of in this federated approach, that using the ontological core is kind of what I hear you. Did I get it?
Yeah, you perfectly. Yeah. The one thing is, it's not like, the one caveat I would put to that, or refinement, is that it's not like, you go build out your ontological core and then you just spread it across the rest of your business. In reality, it's this kind of more iterative process. And actually, it's a dynamic process, which is probably continuous then throughout the life cycle of the business, because it could be that this business unit over here see some opportunity within the market, and they just want to do something very scruffy in order to go exploit that. And maybe they kind of develop their own ontology around to model out what that is, and they're kind of doing their own thing there. So they've actually just they've exported a bit of entropy into the rest of the organization by just doing a bit of their own thing. But they've discovered a new opportunity, and they brought money in, and they've been fast and innovative, and entrepreneurial. So that's a good thing. But now we need the cohesive pressure to kind of say, well, was it a good thing or wasn't it a good thing? What concepts have they discovered here, and how do they start like migrating in? So it's kind of like this continual process, because you're increasingly will be using AI in this process. It's almost like the AI is kind of doing pieces of discovery alongside the humans, and then when we find something interesting, we're kind of compiling that down into this kind of like corporate memory, basically, of that's a really interesting concept, that's worth modeling out. How does that connect into the rest of the other concepts that we've got around there? Oh, it connects to this one and this one. All right, well, so now I should be able to connect those underlying data into that. Oh, yeah, right, this is definitely giving me insights. I can go and do this sort of thing, right? This needs to migrate in. We don't know. I'm speaking like we've got this all worked out, but like there's a few of us at the moment which are on the discovery process,
But I really like this, right? Because I think sometimes when people hear this term, well, we need to create a knowledge graph, people are thinking like, oh, it's this big centralized kind of thing. It'll just never happen, right? Like you can just imagine that. And really what I hear you saying is like, this definition of the ontology really is an iterative process. You can innovate on the edge. And if those concepts and those relationships are worthy enough to bring back in the core, it's just enriching, right, that ontological definition of the company. And that just feels like such a crown jewel, right? Because it's hard to do, but once you get it and refine it and have a process around its innovation, right? That feels like
you're going through, in my opinion, it's like kind of this wave is coming in, full on AI. It's really not just like one thing. It's a bit more kind of like fuzzy than that. 5, 10 years, maybe 20 years at the upset, but also there's a horrible possibility, not probability, there's a horrible possibility it could even be less than 5 years.
Oh my gosh.
I hope that's not going to happen. But this thing's kind of like coming in, and my harsh opinion is that anybody that hasn't done that ontological core process, they probably had their chips. But so it's really important during this phase that as many people as possible get on board with this as early as possible, do the work, discover their ontological core, and then you're going through.
Yeah. Well, and I like your point is that it's iterative, right? You got to start and it's just going to get better, richer.
Got to engage.
It's going to involve, but you're saying, hey, you got to start. If you're not starting, your business is at risk, right?
Yeah. And some businesses are starting, I'm working with them. So, and other people are as well. So like people are beginning, like some of the early people are beginning to do this, but we've had knowledge graphs before, but we've now got this kind of like second wave of like LLM enabled knowledge graphs kind of coming in, and people are embarking upon this process, which is great.
Well, let's use that as kind of a transition, because I was curious about like the how part, right? We've kind of established what it is, why it's important, and the next question is like, how do we kind of do this, right? And I'd love to pick your brain a bit because I know that's part of your business, but I guess imagine I'm a CEO, or let's see a CIO. I've got a bunch of data. It's kind of a mess, but it's rich. Like, what does that conversations look like? What would you tell me I should start to do?
It's very diverse with each different organization that I'm working with, actually. So, the first thing is to kind of just work out what could be a good use case to go test this out on. So, you've probably got like a few different areas that you could go do this, but we need to be quite empirical about the ability of this organization to do the stuff that's got to be done in order to make this thing happen, and also like for the organization to kind of learn with that. So as I'm kind of going in there and developing the knowledge graph strategy for a given organization, I'll be working at kind of like 2 levels. So at the high level, I'm like talking to you, imagining you're the chief executive, and talking about like what the high level strategy is, what the aims of the business are, and the kind of Gen AI strategy that's going on, and the various data strategies, and how this is going to fit in and work with that. There's so much to do here. You don't want to go reinventing the wheel. And if any kind of existing efforts that are on are probably going to help this, like if you've created a data warehouse and you've got a load of your information in data warehouse, that's great, because that's like less data integration that needs to be done. So you kind of want to take anything that's already kind of going on and then just layer the knowledge graph into the existing efforts. So you've got to understand what's going on, and then you've got to like formulate some hypotheses about like what is it that this business is going to benefit from here, so that we can look at that. And then I'll identify a use case that will be able to kind of test those hypotheses out, and then you're on to next phase if you engage with doing that. At which point we can take the results of that and compare them back to the hypothesis. I think it's just very important to be really empirical about it the whole way through, so that the business leaders can gain confidence. And ultimately, you're looking to get to the point where the chief executive says, "Do you know what? I'm convinced now. Stuff we've done enough tests around this stuff. It's working. I can see that it's working, and I'm pressing the button. And here you go. Here, Jeff Bezos style email going out to the staff saying, connect your data, or
Yeah.
collect your last paycheck.
So I guess I hear you saying is that like if you want to start somewhere, right? It's looking for perhaps it's some place where there's opportunity, right?
Yeah, you're looking for like a few hard problem that's not being solved yet by
Okay.
current IT that would be of business value and is going to involve like connecting a few different systems together. One thing that we didn't mention that is like another complexity in this kind of like mind-blowing world that we're entering in, but you there's potentially textual data and structured data. So like up until this point, we've kind of gone, oh, we've got documents and we've got databases. Like again, you can't think like that anymore, unfortunately. You've basically got information that exists within your organization, and some of it's
Uh-huh.
in textual documents and some of it's structured. But if this textual document is referring to this trade that you did and it's got like a load of information about that trade, and then I've got a load of structural information either about that trade or about, like, say, the underlying bond instrument that it's related to or whatever, it's not separate information. I need that information all connected together because it's all part of the intelligence of the organization. So yeah, you're looking for some situation that has got like a few different data sources that can be connected together and are going to like obviously benefit from applying this technology
Right,
to
right.
them.
And so would I be, and I'm sure it differs maybe by client that you would be working with, but would it only be maybe a partial set of the ontology then that you'd be building
Yeah,
out
exactly,
in breadth?
exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. You'd just be like kind
Okay.
of doing out one little slice of it basically, and then once the project's delivered, and one of the things I always say is it's really important that this project is delivered into production and delivers value. So it's got to be so easy with all
Yeah.
of these AI things for it just to be like people do these kind of like prototypes and it all looks great as a kind of prototype, but as soon as you actually want to use it for something real, then it
Uh-huh.
hasn't got the accuracy or anything like that. So it's got to be something that goes all the way into production on this kind of narrowish slice,
Sure.
but it's got kind of enough connected information that it's going to test out some of the hypotheses which have been made in the strategy document.
Right,
That's what you're
right.
looking for.
And it's probably going to maybe refine the ontology a bit. Could be, right?
Yeah.
Once it's been into
Yeah, yeah.
production.
Well, and once you've got the first one done, then you can go find another one which is maybe a bit close to it with some overlapping data that you'll be able to start
Okay.
to reuse existing concepts within there.
Got it.
Yeah, and we call it thinking big and delivering small. It's yeah,
In terms of an approach. Yeah.
yeah. And so you've
Yeah.
kind of got this big idea in your head. I'm going to connect all of
Okay.
my data together. I'm going to
Okay.
build out this ontology. I'm going to create this
Yeah.
semantic layer. But in terms of like projects, you're delivering each time a project which delivers instant
Yeah.
value to the business that they're able to actually that they want to use each day and is great for
Yeah.
them.
Okay. And in terms of like, and I'm sure everyone is different, but how long would like a project be kind of in a range? Like, is it a day, a year, a month?
Yeah, so you're looking at like 1 to 2 months, I think, for the
Okay.
a minimal viable product.
Okay. Okay. And what are some of the challenges that you see, let's say, CEO or see it like, okay, yeah, it sounds like this is really important, really need to start an initiative. What are some of the biggest challenges that you see in terms of organizations kind of really kind of getting it on to make progress in this area?
Yeah, yeah. There's all sorts of problems. I mean, so like as I alluded to at the start, like the some of the meetings where you're bringing together IT and business people into the same room with each other can be quite uncomfortable. It can feel quite unnatural at the start as you're trying to
Yeah.
sort of break down some of these boundaries that are there. There's a phenomenon known as within the community as data hugging. So actually, quite often people
Data
can
hugging.
yeah people can not want to actually let their data out because it's like
Okay.
I'm running this database. That's what I've done for the last sort of
Yeah.
5 years, and you just want me to give it out. It's just going to cause me nothing but pain if I start,
Yeah.
exposing my data out there. There's absolutely nothing in it for me personally. So why would I want
Yeah.
to do that? So the organizations can kind of like, not consciously, but it's almost like the immune system of the body where like individual people are just kind of hugging their data to them and they're
Right.
and also like if you're doing a new project, it's like a ball ache to have to be wanting to conform with existing schemas. Like it's requiring your organization to think a bit more in terms of the whole organization rather than just the individual. So it kind of comes to this
Associates. Yeah.
thing of like connections within the data follow connections within the people. So
People.
we kind of get to this thing that is your organization actually able to collaborate? And if your organization is incapable of collaboration, it's probably incapable of pulling this feat off.
Yes. Yes.
But you're better off finding that out sooner rather than later, in my opinion.
Okay. And how do you find that out?
You engage with the process.
Okay. Is it obvious? It must be obvious to you when you go to meet a client in terms of what are some of the most immediate challenges when you maybe see the body language? Because you said this is a team sport, right? It's not like one person has all the knowledge, right? Even if they have an LLM helping them derive, right, all these concepts and relationships and things, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've only just set up this business, and the clients that have come to me, and each one of them, the people I'm very fortunate that I've got a huge admiration for them. There's a certain sort of character to the person who kind of sees what's coming and thinks strategically, and they're a kind of leader that's bold enough to engage with this and forward thinking enough to do it. So luckily I've been in the fortunate position, I guess, because of my LinkedIn thing that the people I'm working with all, they're
in the know.
They're going to be all right. Yeah, those guys are going to be all right.
Yeah, like they're not because they understand the strategic.
They're early adopters though, so they're not the kind of laggards that these are the people who are engaging early.
Yeah. Okay. That's really because the reason I asked you, right? There's probably, like you said, some cultural kind of issues, right, that collaboration and maybe some cultural issues of the company. As you said, kind of there's a ticking clock, right, around the companies who are going to be taking action, collaboration, innovation on the edge, making progress. And the question I was going to ask you, I was just thinking about, this is a new form of IP. So how do you see, or what are your recommendations for organizations who now have to manage this IP? Is it the part of someone's job responsibility now to officially, as an ontologist, to kind of manage it with some kind of federated approach around how do you?
Yeah, right, I mean, this we don't really know yet. This is part of, I think that's just going to kind of have to play itself out as we experiment more with this. We just don't know, because to a certain extent, actually what makes a lot of sense, and that's why we have a lot of these already, is like certain concepts should be shared across an industry. So like take finance, for instance, we've got like the 5O ontology, which is the financial business ontology. So these are concepts which businesses are interchanging with each other. So it makes sense, actually, in order for those to be like open standards that are shared across businesses. And like pharma, like you've got the gene ontology. So all of the different pharmaceuticals have collaborated together to do these shared ontologies, and that really makes sense. But my sense is, and not everybody agrees with me at this when I put it to people, but my sense is that there will be certain things that are captured within the ontology which will actually represent private IP and private know-how of that organization, and being able to differentiate what makes sense to release out into the community and encourage to be a standard so that you can better interoperate with other people within your network versus information which should be withheld. I think it's nuanced, and I think we're not yet at the point where these things are being tested out, but I suspect that we will get to that point.
Well, and I like your point, right? Standards that are out there like schema.org or the ones that you like, no one wants to reinvent the wheel, right? If those things, especially if they've been standards for a long time, right, kind of take them and then adapt, right, any nuances unique to, right, your organization. And when the clock is ticking, right, there's also, right, kind of a timeline of being able to leverage some of those standards for your own benefit as a company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's just then whether, when I take the diff between what is in the public standard and actually I've got these other ontological concepts, I mean, maybe it just turns out to be the data underneath and it's not the ontology at all. That is possible. But my personal belief is that some of the ontological modeling in there that will be quite nuanced will actually represent IP, and then that should be really guarded.
Yeah, because it's
your core. Yeah, it's the essence of who you
your
are.
Core, right? And the fact that needs to, right, just like any other corporate asset, needs to innovate, needs to evolve. Your business is evolving. This ontological core needs to evolve. So I think, the oversight and the management of that. And as you said too, there's the human collaboration around different parts of the organization on their willingness to kind of adopt that, right, to kind of conform to some of these shared standards.
Yeah.
Well, it gives me a little bit of approach in terms of the approach. Anything else you'd like to add in terms of kind of the how that you think would be important for anybody listening around, okay, they get this, but maybe they just don't know where to start? What would you tell them?
Yeah, there's a lot of resources that are out there now, like a load of good articles on Medium, or come follow me on LinkedIn.
Of course.
Put out stuff each week. So yeah, there's a lot that can be learned there, and I think we're going to see a lot more coming out this year as well for guidance on that stuff.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, I learned a lot. There was a lot of questions that I had. I certainly heard some really important points about, right, getting the core in place. You don't have a whole lot of time, right? You can leverage LLMs to kind of help you in this process. What other messages that do you think are key points that you'd like to kind of leave to people who are listening?
I think you've summed it up very well there, and it's been really interesting to. I've done a lot of like the kind of podcast where I've been talking about technical stuff, and I think just like getting this, just being able to concentrate on the strategy, I think is really is really useful. So no, I think you've distilled out all of the messages very clearly. So I've just encourage people that are listening to this and are in a position to engage with it, to do a bit of research and to engage. I think it may turn out to be the key strategic move that you can make for your organization. I truly believe that.
I do too, right? I built a graph now a number of years ago, and it really opened my eyes. And I think too, what I realized is that when you show that to business people, it totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. They get it. Yeah, they get it.
They totally get it. Like once you show it to them and you have the relationships. And I think so that's the other thing, that the understanding of the business is, right, can be represented visually, right? And what these concepts mean, how they're connected. So I just think that can also accelerate, right, this data-driven culture and how this is brought in and how it can really fuel, right, your AI strategy. And so, Tony, thanks for sharing a lot of really great wisdom.
You're most welcome. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, because I don't see the data piece, which is why I wanted to speak with you on the podcast, the data piece really being looked at, right, to this level of detail. And for those of us who work in this space, we know how hard that can be, but we also know that once we can get our arms around that and get clarity around what it is, how it's connected, wow, like the things that it can unlock.
Yeah, that's huge.
That is really huge. And so I know you mentioned LinkedIn. Follow Tony. I'd recommend following Tony on LinkedIn. His articles are amazing. I know you also write on Medium. And then I know you've got your website, knowledge-graph-guys.com. So if you're listening to this and you want to get some guidance or hire Tony as one of the world-renowned experts on knowledge graphs, reach out to Tony on the website.
Awesome. Thank you.
So Tony,
thanks, James.
Thank you very much for joining, and I look forward to reading your next article on LinkedIn.
All right, great.